All right. Hey, everyone. Good to see you. So last week we moved from step 1 into step 2 with the 7 steps to awakening. And tonight or today, it's not nighttime yet. I guess I thought I was in England or something. Today, we will be starting with quote 218, but I thought I would just chat about one little thing before I do that. Because what I talked about when we moved from step 1 to step 2 was about, step 1, I said, did its job on me, because when step 1 was complete, I didn't want an intellectual understanding of truth. I wanted experience. I only wanted experience. And I shared with you as we started step 2 that I had a kind of a plan that would help me have the experience, see for myself that the world is not real, rather than just carrying around this intellectual idea that the world is not real. After the teaching, at some point, I don't remember exactly when, but this thought arose in my head. I might have given the impression that up until that point, my path was an intellectual path, and that's not true. So I thought maybe before we continue, I should talk about the difference between an intellectual path and not an intellectual. I don't know what name that would have. Not intellectual. A path that is purely intellectual, which sometimes some of the quotes in the 7 steps, talked about the scholars. And when it was talking about the scholars, it was really talking about a path that's purely intellectual. A path that's purely intellectual does not involve true practice. That's how you know. Sometimes it does include meditation, which is kind of funny. Sometimes what you find on an intellectual path is some type of meditation is happening, and that's like the only practice. And if you read around a bit, you will find people that talk about how you can meditate and meditate and meditate and not make any progress. And that's because your practice has to be a part of your daily life. If your practice is not a part of your daily life, if you're not, as they say, getting off the cushion and in some way involving some type of spiritual practice, any progress that is made will be very, 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 very slow in most cases. I think there are a couple of exceptions. So my path was never purely intellectual, because there was always lots of practice. Always, from the very beginning of the conscious spiritual path, there was, looking at my upsets, looking at my mind, discovering my false beliefs, giving my willingness to let them go. All this stuff was happening all along the way. But I think what's natural for all of us is, in spite of the fact that we may be really using practice in our daily life, I think all of us try to imagine what truth is. And that part's intellectual. Right? Because we can't imagine what truth is. And so even if our path is not purely intellectual, like the scholar who's just trying to learn the truth, like that person learned anything else, right? Even if there is practice and there is sincere looking and there is sincere letting go and all of that, sincere inquiry, I think that we all imagine truth, at least to some degree. And in the beginning, I think that's perfectly natural. And I even wonder, if we didn't have some kind of a fantasy about what truth is, if we would even move forward. We have a way of moving forward towards goals. And so we imagine for ourselves some kind of a goal, right? But whatever we're imagining is not what the truth is. And so even though imagining got us started, and imagining may have carried us so far, At some point, we have to decide that we're ready to drop the imagining, or our imagination remains an obstacle. So that's the shift that happened for me between step 1 and step 2, right? Was I got to the point where I fully accepted that I can't imagine truth, and that imagining truth is an obstacle, and I wanted to let it go. So I thought I would come back and mention that. It's kind of funny because if you read NTI, way back in NTI Luke, which for me would be, when I scribed that, probably in the late part of 2005 or the early part of 2006, so a long time ago, right there in NTI Luke, the Holy Spirit was saying to me, where do you imagine I'm taking you? And was telling me right then, whatever you're imagining, you're wrong. That's an obstacle. But I wasn't ready to let go of it way back then. You see, the fact that that was told to me, that our imagination of truth is an obstacle, doesn't mean that I was ready to let go of it. So I held on to my imagination of truth for several more years. What we're looking at now, when I would have crossed from step 1 into step 2 and then said, okay, I get it. I can't imagine truth. I need to let this go and go for direct experience. That would have been in 2012. So let's say 6 years later, 6 to 6.5 years later. So sometimes, I remember Peace Pilgrim said, it took quite a while for the living to catch up to the believing. Right? That's the way she put it. Sometimes we know something, like I knew because I'd been told from within that imagining truth is an obstacle, right? But 6.5 years later, the insight deepened enough to where I had the willingness to let it go. So again, if a path is just study and learning and look how much I know, that's purely intellectual. If there's sincere practice going on, but there's still, maybe an imagining of what truth is, there's still an intellectual component. And that intellectual component may even be helpful for a while. But one thing we learn on this path is there are lots of things that are helpful for a while, and then they got to be let go. In fact, NTI Revelation chapter 1 is one of my favorite chapters in NTI. If you've never read it, you might go read that on your own. NTI Revelation chapter 1. But what NTI Revelation chapter 1 talks about is these symbols are going to be sent to guide us to awakening, and that we're to follow these symbols even though we don't know where they're leading. But at some point, each symbol that is guiding us also has to be let go. And then it says, your job. So listen to this sentence. I love this sentence, or I wouldn't be able to quote it. I can quote very few things. Your job is to keep moving forward by letting go until there's nothing left to hold on to. I'll repeat that. Your job is to keep moving forward by letting go until there's nothing left to hold on to. So what happens is different things come into our experience, maybe even an imagination of what the truth is, and it has a temporary helpfulness. It's motivating us to this practice, right? But at some point it has to go, because at some point its helpfulness ends and it becomes an obstacle. And so that's a part of what we kind of have to be in tune to with our intuition, is when something is helpful. And so we should be embracing it because it is helpful to me right now. And when its helpfulness has ended and it's starting to shift to an obstacle. And so it's time to let it go. Let me get a drink and then I'll give you another excellent example. Another excellent example is things like the idea of a God, right? A God. Maybe the idea of like ascended masters, maybe even the idea of Jesus, right? or angels, it could even be angels, all of these things can have a helpfulness for a time. For me, personally, this idea of Holy Spirit, and notice I'm using the word idea. These are all ideas. This idea of Holy Spirit was extremely helpful. If you have ever read any part of the Holy Spirit's interpretation of the New Testament, you have to recognize that was helpful to me at the time. And in fact, it continues to be helpful to other people now, right? But even in NTI, the Holy Spirit encourages me to let go of it as an idea. It says, I'm just, you are me, I am you, right? So even while, and I was listening to it as if I was listening to another. It was as if there was this me who didn't have this clarity. And I sat down without the clarity, opened up, and this dictation came into my mind. And I wrote it down almost as if you were dictating something and I was writing it down. There's in no way that there was a conscious awareness that I was touching my own clarity. That did not exist at all, right? So it was helpful. I mean, look at all the clarity that came. This, trusting this Holy Spirit that was separate from me. Look at all this clarity that came, and I practiced it. And I practiced it, and it brought me up to, you could say it raised me in consciousness, brought me along the path of awakening, this imaginary Holy Spirit. But then I came to the point, by now it had morphed into inner Ramana Maharshi. Then I came to this point where I got to the end of the teachings of inner Ramana, and I was taught about the resistor, the doubter, and abiding. Now, for those of you who don't know the teachings of inner Ramana, and you don't know about the resistor, the doubter, and abiding, which, by the way, somebody pointed out to me years later, spells RDA. I didn't even notice that at the time. It's like, oh, isn't that funny? I had no idea. But the resistor, I was taught, is, the average person on earth, right? The resistor is someone who is fully resisting the truth by thinking they know who they are. So, Regina, I'm Regina. I was born in Coffeyville, Kansas, to Don and Anita. I moved around to all these places. I had all these experiences. I grew up to be this really responsible person. And here's what I like, and here's what I don't like, and here's what annoys me, and, blah, 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 blah. I can tell you all about myself. That's the resistor. Right? So when we're doing that, we're in the resistor place in that moment, right? I was told that the doubter, the person that is called the doubter, that phase is really what the phase of the spiritual path is. This is where we're starting to question. The doubting, I was pointed out, kind of happens in two directions. And, we start at one end of the doubting phase and we move towards the other end of the doubting phase. So there's progress within the doubting phase. But the doubter has two experiences that are going on for her or him. One experience is the doubter is now beginning to question, am I that person I've always thought I am? Are those values really my values? Are those thoughts really my thoughts? Am I my history and my story, right? You're starting to question all of that. So you're beginning to doubt that you are who you always thought you were. But the other thing that's happening is somehow clarity is coming in. It could be a combination of things. You could be having insights when you read or contemplate or listen to a teacher. You could be doing journaling and having insights coming. You could be listening to an inner voice like I was. You could be totally focused on a teacher, but you're getting lots of clarity from that teacher. And all of these insights, no matter whether they seem to be coming from within or from without or a combination, they're moving you. They're moving you towards truth and away from resistor. But you're doubting in that direction too, in that you don't think that wisdom is your wisdom. Right? You're learning it from Adyshanti or Mooji or A Course in Miracles, or right? It's not you, it's not your wisdom, even though the whole time you've got these inner confirmations going on, right? I mean, right? The whole time you got this, yeah, but that's not me. I'm getting it from there. So that's the phase I was in, of course, as I was listening to Holy Spirit, and as I was listening to inner Ramana, right? I was in the doubter phase. And so when I got to the end of inner Ramana, I was taught about the resistor. I was taught about the doubter. And then I was also taught about abiding. Abiding is when you accept that that is your wisdom. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to carry it in your head, because it's always available as a live feed. And you can step out into life without knowing anything, without having to every morning sit down and get your clarity, even though you may still occasionally go back and do that, because the clarity is always here, and it will arise in the moment as you need it, and you can live off of that live feed. Then you can let go of the doubter phase and begin abiding. And what I was told at the end of the teachings of inner Ramana was that I had had a very strong doubter phase, because a doubter phase, even though the word may sound negative, it's actually very positive, because remember, it's moving you from resistor towards abiding. So I had had a very strong doubter phase, but it was time for me to let that go now and step into abiding. And I knew that this was true. It was time. So what had been helpful, right, being the scribe, listening to an inner voice, first a Holy Spirit and then an inner Ramana, now it was time for me to put that behind me as a childish game, childish toy. Not that it's not childish for someone else, because it may be right what they need right now. But if I was to stay holding on to that, I would not have continued my own progression. And so this is when I let go of believing in a Holy Spirit and inner Ramana. And in fact, I don't know if you've ever heard my Buddha at the gas pump interview with Rick Archer, but he asks me something about this, and I tried to explain it. And I think I said something like, it's as if consciousness is using the idea of Ramana or the idea of Jesus and blowing through that idea and creating what appears to be an ascended master, but only for as long as we need that. There is no they that exists, right? But if somebody was to attempt to let go of that idea, the idea of their God or their Jesus or their inner Ramana or their Holy Spirit before it was time, that would be premature, and that would shorten their progress as well. Right? Isn't that funny? I mean, imagine if I had let go, if somebody had come along after I had written only NTI Matthew and said, there's no such thing as a Holy Spirit. You shouldn't be listening to that. You're just fooling yourself. Look what all I would have missed. Right? All of that clarity that it was important, because I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to have direct access to the live feed. I wasn't ready to know that it was always available as my natural wisdom. I wasn't that ready for that yet. So again, as we go along this path, even if it's not a purely intellectual path, it can have intellectual aspects, and it can also have untruths, even untruths that are helpful. I think I remember reading something like this in one of Eckhart Tolle's books. Might have been The Power of Now, but I could be wrong. But it seems like early in the book, he says something about how not everything that comes to us on the spiritual path is actually true, but it comes because it's helpful. And then he spends a lot of time talking about the inner body, feeling the inner body and focusing on the inner body or something. And you get to the end of the book and he says, by the way, there is no inner body. So he even did it throughout his own book, right? He used a symbol to get people focusing within and all this. But then at the end of the book, he's like, yeah, but that doesn't actually exist. So not everything you encounter on the way to truth is true, but it points to truth. And as long as it's genuinely helpful to you, even if somebody else comes along and says, there's no such thing as Jesus, just say, thank you very much, but I have a strong connection to Jesus right now, and that's helping me. So I'm going to stay right here, right? You gotta be true to your spiritual path. As Adyshanti would say, never abdicate your authority. Never abdicate your authority. It's just about being really tuned in and being able to feel what is truly helpful for me and what is not helpful for me, right now. And staying as close as you can to only that which is helpful right now, and let everything else go. You don't have to read every book everybody tells you about, right? You got to know what's good for you right now and stay right there. And that's how you'll make the fastest progress, because there's no strain. It's a direct path. And don't let anybody else tell you what the direct path is. Follow your direct path, right? Just follow that intuition very carefully. So that's what I wanted to start with. So we've got that done and out of the way. And now we're going to move on into whatever is coming next. So out of the stillness, 218. So I'm going to start, of course, with the 7 steps to awakening, 218. One ever-present pure awareness. This alone has true existence. The world perceived and measured by you is but illusion, jaundiced, yellow, caused by the ego's concepts, false and treacherous desires. So I'll read that one more time and then we'll shift over to out of the stillness. One ever-present pure awareness. This alone has true existence. The world perceived and measured by you is but illusion, jaundiced, yellow, caused by the ego's concepts, false and treacherous desires. Okay, so 218 and out of the stillness. God is all that is. God alone is true. Everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. Where does illusion come from? It is a projection of mind. What gives mind the power to project illusion? I do. How is this power given? Through involvement, through belief and desire. If I want to know the only reality as true through direct experience, I must willingly and with heart lose interest in the chatter and desires of mind. I will to do this. I will to do this. Yeah. So I'm going to start over and then kind of pause as I read along. So God is all that is. God alone is true. Everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. Well, that sentence could be read and understood in one way, and it would be true. And it could be read and understood in another way, and it would be untrue. So why don't we just pause with this sentence right here? It says, everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. So I have a blanket on my lap. Almost every time I sit down, even in the summer, I put a blanket on my lap. I don't know why, but I noticed that Mooji does the same thing. I guess some of us just like blankies. I don't know. I sit down, I grab a blanket. It's pretty automatic. When I tell you, this is a blanket, and especially if I was to tell you some story about it, like this is my blanket. I got this blanket when Laurent and I were together. I got this one and he got a different one. It was the same blanket, but it was maroon where mine was tan, and these were our blankets, and blah, 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 blah. That's when I'm in illusion. In fact, even just saying this is a blanket is when I'm in illusion, by defining it as a blanket. So when this sentence says everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion, what's assumed there, because that of course was my way of seeing at that time, what's assumed there is that I'm looking at this and saying that's a blanket. In fact, back then I still would have been saying I had both blankets. The other one I've since gotten rid of because Ellie chewed it up a little bit, but I would have said, that was my blanket, that was Laurent's blanket. I even in 2012 probably still would have told you all that about it. If we look at the sentences right before where it says God is all that is, God alone is true. Now, God, of course, is just a word, right? It's just a word. But what that word is attempting to point to, right? Which we, some people call it consciousness. Some people call it reality. Some people call it isness. That's what this is. You see? So this, as well as everything else that we experience, is, it is right now. But if I call it a blanket, I'm misperceiving it. And it's an illusion of what it is. I once looked up the word illusion in the dictionary, and the definition that I found was an illusion is something that can be misperceived by the senses. But it's something. Did you hear that part? It's something that can be misperceived by what? Oh, by the senses, by my eyes, my ears, my fingers, my nose, my tongue, right? And certainly by the mind, which wasn't in the definition, but definitely by the mind, right? So something exists. The illusion is that it's a blanket. The illusion is whatever story I might attach to the blanket, right? The illusion is that it's a good blanket or a bad blanket, right? But is not the illusion, you see. So can you see how that sentence is, if you understood one way, it's true, and if understood another way, it's actually false. If we understand it, everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. If we understand that sentence to say, blanket, computer, dog, person, that's illusion, that sentence is true. But if we think this means there's nothing, right? That's what this sentence means, then the sentence is false. There's not nothing, although is sometimes described as nothing. But there's not, it's not a void. Right? And that's what I used to imagine the word meant, illusion, until the day that I looked it up in the dictionary and understood what it meant. So when this says God is all that is, again, God is just a selected symbol. We could have said consciousness is all that is, reality is all that is, light is all that is. It goes on and on and on, the symbols that are used, right? Nirvana is all that is, the Tao is all that is, right? That's literal. And so if I say it's something other than that, the statement that I'm making that it's something other than that, that's the illusion. So God is all that is. God alone is true. Everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion, meaning because I think it's something else, right? That's what makes it illusion. Where does illusion come from? Now, this is going to get maybe simple. Where does illusion come from? Now, when these kinds of questions are in my journal, by the way, this was an inquiry. And when you see the answer is what I wrote after contemplating the inquiry. In fact, if you read the introduction to Out of the Stillness, it tells you what you don't see are the pauses. You know, when you're reading Out of the Stillness, you don't see that this question arose and then Regina contemplated it and then wrote an answer. It just kind of looks like boom, boom. That's not the way it ever happened, right? So the question arose, where does illusion come from? And what I did in real life was I contemplated that until I had an insight. And what got written down was my insight. So where does illusion come from? It is a projection of mind. Now, let me explain this to you because it's really quite simple. Why do we call this a blanket? Because we were taught that it was a blanket and we held that intellectual idea in the mind. And now every time we see it or something similar, we automatically, without even looking or experiencing the thing at all, say blanket, right? Tree, person, good person, bad person, nice dog, naughty dog. I mean, blah, 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 right? Everything that we define, every definition is a projection of mind. So we don't see what is. We see what we have been taught to see or what we have learned to see through our experiences. It's a projection of mind. We also almost never, although occasionally we do, we also almost never have a direct experience of anything. I don't need to directly now, what does a baby do with a blanket? You know, what does a baby do? Here's what a baby does. I'm going to be a baby for a minute. Okay. That baby's experiencing that blanket. I mean, right? They are experiencing the blanket in every way they can think of, right? They're smelling it, they're tasting it, they're squeezing it. Sometimes they're looking at it. We don't experience a blanket because we say blanket, we think we know everything about it. You see how that cuts us off from experiencing it? So by projecting our ideas onto a thing, we actually cut ourselves off from that thing. There becomes a me and an it. There is no God. There's no God. There's me, there's it, and I'm the know-it-all, right? I'm the know-it-all. Babies aren't know-it-alls. They, you know. So where does illusion come from? If, you know, what says that this is not God, that this is blanket? The mind. That's simple. That's not complex. You know, sometimes when we hear about projection, it sounds complex, but it's not complex. What gives mind the power to project illusion? Well, the only answer I could come up with that is I do. Right? I mean, where else would it get this power? I'm the one that agrees that's a blanket. I'm the one that doesn't need to experience it because I know what the hell a blanket is. You know, this is reminding me of one of the, I never can remember which lesson it is in A Course in Miracles, but it's one of the first 50 lessons. where Jesus says something like, you could become enlightened from just that table if you could take your ideas about it away and see it for what it is. Right? Now, that doesn't mean that the term blanket and table aren't useful, practical, right? It's nice that if you're cold and you ask me for a blanket, I know better than to hand you a table, right? But I think what we have to look at is, are my ideas of what things are cutting me off from the experience of what they are? Now, with me, with the exception, well, the apple is nature, with the exception of the towel rack and the floor, which some of you may know what stories I'm alluding to, the towel rack and the floor. With me, the experience of what things are came most easily with nature. And I think this is why you find so many mystics spend a lot of time in nature. And this is why I love it when people come to Levitas and we take them out and we just spend time in nature. We give them something to contemplate often and then just hang out for 2 hours and they're on their own contemplating, right? Let me rewind a little bit. Once upon a time, when I was in North Carolina and again, much earlier on the spiritual path and really trying to intellectually understand what truth is, I was studying A Course in Miracles, and A Course in Miracles talks about your creations, right? Never tells us what the hell these creations are. Right? So one day, talking to my Holy Spirit within, that was very wise, I asked the Holy Spirit what these creations are. And the guidance that I received was to go outside lay down in my front yard, which in North Carolina had a lot of grass, go lay outside in the front yard, pick one blade of grass, and be with that blade of grass until I understood the answer. That was my guidance. And I don't remember how long I laid out there. I'll say 2 hours, but I'm picking that out of a hat now, but it was some time, right? And all of a sudden, I felt the being that both the grass and I were. I can't explain it. After laying there long enough, open enough, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God. And then I knew that the creation, the creations, that word, and extension of God, that word, are synonymous, right? That this is all that is. This is the isness. This is the is. That's what this is, right? That's the God that's everything, But when we're just walking along on the grass, got to go cut the damn grass, we don't see God, right? But if we spend enough time just being with things, we can actually begin to feel their being, which is also our being, right? And this is why it's Sinus says, you talk about the grass. She says, got to go cut. She said, God's hair. And then oh, that was funny. This is why having time just to be is so important, and like Shauna and George, I know, are so blessed because in the summertime, they're right there in La Vida, and, the Cuchara River runs right by where we live in La Vida, and George, did his Jesus thing and built, these benches and stuff out there. We can just go and sit by that Cucharas River for 2-3 hours and do nothing. Right? And a lot of this realization of God as it is, which is also what we are. There's, the words always suck, but it comes from just being in nature. Now, it's not just nature that is that. Again, everything is that. But nature seems to have, because it's more like us. How's that? It's more like us. We seem to be able to connect with it first. I'm laughing at the driving that just came into the room. All right, so God is all that is. God alone is true. Everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. Where does illusion come from? It's a projection of the mind. That's just grass. How unimportant is grass? I mean, think of how unimportant do we all take grass to be most of the time. In fact, I remember one time I was with Jacqueline. I used to spend a lot of time with Jacqueline. I think about 2 hours every Wednesday training her to be president minister. And often I was teaching her something and then she had to go and do it. And doing it took her longer than me telling her because it had steps and stuff, right? And so I was being while she was doing whatever it was I had just, taught her to do, trying it out on her own. And I remember one time her mind projected onto me that I was judging her, that she wasn't doing it right. And which is a natural thing. I mean, that's the way we humans think, right? But she told me about it. And what was so funny is, what I was doing? I was looking out the window at the grass blowing in the wind, feeling that beingness. I wasn't even watching her. I didn't even know where she was. I guess I assumed if she got stuck in the steps, she would tell me, wait a minute, I don't know what to do. And then I would have brought myself back. Right? So, and there's a lot of time that I spend with grass now. I love grass in a way that I used to never love grass. I love insects in a way that I used to never love insects. Because when you fall in love with being, then you have to be in love with everything, because everything is being. And if you have trouble getting to the fact, I think that Rupert Spira, in his book, The Transparency of Things, uses 2 words, because obviously people can see that grass is being, but they may not be able to see that blanket is being. So what he does, I think, just to be helpful, is he refers to things that we perceive as living as being, and he refers to things that we perceive as inanimate as existing. But if you look at both those words, being or existing, they both have the ing. And it's in the ing where you find the truth. Right? The ening. What do we call that? The ening. We have to make up words on this path sometimes, don't we, in order to really communicate. Both the grass is ening and the blanket is ening, right? Neither one of them is not present. Do you agree? So again, to help people, he used 2 different words, just like I think in A Course in Miracles, it uses 2 different words for projection and extension, when actually there's only one thing going on here. It's the ening, the ing-ing. That's the only thing going on here, the ening. So God is all that is. God alone is true. Everything else that is sensed and experienced is illusion. Where does illusion come from? It is a projection of mind. What gives mind the power to project illusion? I do. Right? I'm the one going around believing. I'm the one going out around cutting myself off from things because I know what they are already. How is this power given? Through involvement, through belief and desire. Now, when I say through involvement here, I'm talking about involvement with the ideas, not with the thing, right? I've cut myself off from the thing with the ideas. So the involvement is involvement with the ideas, involvement with the mind. Oh, somebody's walking in the door. So the involvement, I know there's somebody here. Hey, Ron, I'm teaching. I guess that's Ron. Either that or a murderer just walked in. Nope, it's Ron. So again, involvement with the mind. The mind is telling me what everything is, and I'm just believing it. And as you know, it gets much more extreme than blanket, right? The mind gets into good person, good habit, bad habit. This shouldn't be, this never should have happened. How dare he, blah, 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 blah. And guess what all of that is? Projection. But for just a moment, look at yourself, look at the last time that you did something like that, judge someone, judge some situation, saw something as wrong, just recall that to your memory for a moment. Did you see it as projection? Or did you see it as truth? See, that's where we need to pause. See, aren't you giving the projection the power? Weren't you just believing he's a jerk? Weren't you just believing that should not have happened? Who was doing that? Right? Yeah, absolutely. So this is why we have to pause and we have to look, because if we want to know, why am I cut off from God? Which isn't a truth, but it's, it's a feeling, it's a belief. I'm cut off from God because I'm believing all this other stuff. There's the answer. There's the obstacle. So how is this power given? The power of projection? It's given through involvement with the mind. It's given through both belief and desire, because in order to want something to be different than it is, you have to have a desire for it to be a certain way. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So belief and desire then are the two culprits. Those are the two things that cut us off from God. If I want to know the only reality as true through direct experience, now we're back to my goal, right? Remember, this is my goal when I started step 2. I want to know this as a direct experience. I don't want just some intellectual, spiritual beliefs. So if I want to know the only reality as true through direct experience, I must willingly and with heart lose interest in the chatter and desires of mind. There we go. I now have another strategy. You'll notice all these strategies get developed. I have a strategy. If I don't want just an intellectual spiritual path, I want the actual experience of everything as God. Since I now realize that this is the obstacle, this is what projects onto everything and says, that's not God, that's not God, that's not God. Since this is the problem, then I have to lose interest in this. And then notice it says, I will to do this. It didn't happen right then, you understand? I will to do this. Give my willingness. I will to do this. So that's number 218. And I'll take a drink of water. And what we'll do is we'll move on to 221. And we'll look at 221 in our last 9 minutes. So 221 from the 7 steps to awakening. I love this one. The world, like snake in rope, thief in a stump, mirage in air, has no real existence. Seeming to be mere appearance is its nature. There are several walks that I take with my dog around this neighborhood. They all get repeated from time to time, but I have several walks I get to do, and she gets to do. She also loves the variety, different walks. We don't go out and do the same walk every time. And there's this one walk that I think we actually started doing it for the first time last summer. Maybe I don't know why we never did that. I've lived here 13 years, but never did that particular walk. Started doing it last summer, and I don't know, the second or third time doing the walk. Now, one thing we do have around here are snakes. We have, quite a few snakes, and some of them are rattlesnakes. And, you just don't want to get too close to them because they can harm the body. So one of the things I try to do when I'm walking around is remain aware, make sure that the dog or I don't step on a rattlesnake. And my last dog did get bit by a snake because I wasn't aware. So I try to remain aware, but sometimes I forget, So this one day I'm walking along, remaining aware for snakes. And I look ahead about, I don't know how far, I'll say 25 feet. There's a snake. Right. Oh, there's a snake. So I take my dog and we take this kind of broad circle around that snake, so we're still walking towards it. We're going to go around it. Right. Because, you only have to be like 10 feet from a rattlesnake and you're safe. So you don't have to run the other way or anything. You just have to walk around it. So we start walking around this snake, but we're getting closer and closer and closer. And as I get closer, it's not a snake. In fact, that same snake's still laying there. Nobody ever moved it. It's like I don't know what it is, like a cord or something that's been laying in the street all these months, right? It's not a snake. So that's basically what this particular quote is saying, number 221, when it says the world like snake in rope, right? Right? Like thief in stump. I remember when I was a little girl, real little girl, there was this pole outside my bedroom window. It was a light pole. At night, it was a monster. Right? I was scared every night. I was scared to death. My mom would walk out and turn out the lights because that monster right outside my window. Right? It was just a pole. So the world, like snake in rope, thief in a stump, mirage in air, has no real existence. Seeming to be mere appearance is its nature. And again, this takes us back to God is all that is, right? It appears to be a blanket because I call it a blanket, but God is all that is, right? If all you have is Play-Doh and you make an entire world, you have all these things, people, horses, buildings, cars, everything you made out of Play-Doh, you still only have Play-Doh, right? You can't create something out of nothing. Whatever material you begin with, is that material is still there, even if you make something out of it. So all there is God. And when we see all of these other things and define all these other things with our mind, we're missing God. We're not seeing what is here. So if we go to number 221 in Out of the Stillness, it is time to remember that the world is not real. And Regina, remember, Regina is talking to herself here. This is her personal journal we're looking at. It is time to remember that the world is not real. How does one react to an idea or appearance when it is known that it is not real? Does one react with attachment? Or does one feel free to let it be as it appears? So if for some reason Cinderella is coming to mind. So if I'm watching Cinderella on TV, and I love the 1997 Whitney Houston Cinderella. I just love that show. I've probably seen it 30 times. Right? I love it every time. I love it. So if I'm watching Cinderella on the TV, I love it. I just told you, I've seen it like 30 times. I love it, but I know it's not real. Do I have any need when the prince is trying shoes on all these other ladies and not recognizing Cinderella, or even more, when the stepmother hides Cinderella when the prince comes so that he doesn't know she's there? Do I have any need to go up to the TV and scream at the TV and try and change the TV, start clawing at the TV? No, I don't have any need to do that because I know it's not real. I can watch it. I can enjoy it. I can, in some way, I'm involved in it. I'm feeling the emotions of it. But in some way, I'm not involved in it either because I know it's not real. You see, there's like an involvement that is just being with. that's different from attachment. And you all know that involvement because you've all cried at movies. You've all laughed at movies, right? So like it's an involvement that's not an involvement. Does that make sense? So how does one react to an idea or appearance when it is known that it is not real? Does one react with attachment, or does one feel free to let it be as it appears? Sure, even while you're scared of the movie, you can let the movie be the movie. Even while you're sad, you can let the movie be the movie. But can we do that in what we call real life? In what we call my life? Notice your attachments and realize each attachment signifies an idea that is taken to be real. This is an assignment that I gave myself. Again, this starts with, it's time to remember that the world is not real. Well, wherever I'm getting upset, wherever I'm getting scared, wherever I'm getting worried, wherever I'm feeling guilt, right? These are places where I'm believing it. If I'm feeling that with attachment, notice the word attachment. Again, there is a type of involvement that's not attachment. And you'll know the difference when these emotions come along that aren't attachment, because you allow them to be and you allow them to go. You're not trying to change anything. But when there's an attachment, you want things to go your way. That's how you recognize it, right? You want things to go your way. So wherever you want things to go your way, that's where you're believing. So that's where you practice your inquiry. That's where you start looking, right? That's you could call it a portal. We're not saying you're bad if you're attached. That would be a misinterpretation of the teaching. We're not saying if you find an attachment, you're bad. No. We're saying if you find an attachment, you've got a place to begin your inquiry. You've got a place to begin looking, and you keep looking until the attachment is seen through. That's what we're saying. So all of these attachments that we have aren't to be avoided, because if you avoid them, you're avoiding the portal. They're to be looked at. They're to be gone into. They're to be understood. They're to be felt. So I'll read this again, and then we are done for today. So number 221, and out of the stillness, it is time to remember that the world is not real. How does one react to an idea or appearance when it is known that it is not real? Does one react with attachment, or does one feel free to let it be as it appears? Notice your attachments and realize each attachment signifies an idea that is taken to be real. And so again, that's where your inquiry begins. That's where you go looking for, where am I believing? So that's it. We're out of time for today. So we'll come back next week and we'll start with number 223. Y'all have a great day. Bye.